When the millionaire's baby went missing, only the nanny knew where to look. Welcome to Alcott Stories. We are so grateful to have you here, and we hope this story touches your heart and leaves you with a sense of hope, love, and inspiration. May the journey you are about to experience fill your soul with warmth and understanding, and may you be reminded that redemption and love are possible for everyone. I humbly ask you to stay with us till the very end of this story. I promise you, you won't regret it. There are twists, emotions, and moments that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for being part of the Alcott Stories family. Now, sit back and enjoy this heartfelt journey. Tayana Brooks stood at the edge of the long, icy driveway, her suitcase a stubborn shadow beside her. The Cross estate rose in the distance like a monument built by power, not people. A mansion too quiet to feel lived in, too polished to carry warmth. The gates had opened automatically when her ride-share car arrived, yet no one had come to greet her. She looked down at her hands, smooth and freshly lotioned despite her nerves, and drew a deep breath that cut against the winter air. She was here for a job, nothing more, and yet everything in her heart whispered that this was more than a job. She walked up the marble steps, boots echoing like distant gunshots, and rang the bell. The door opened after a beat, not by a butler, but by Damien Cross himself. 32, impeccably dressed in tailored navy slacks and a white shirt so crisp it looked starched by diamonds. His face was sharp, handsome, but carved with arrogance like granite. His eyes didn't meet hers. "Tayana?" he asked, though it felt like he already forgot her name. She nodded. "Follow me," he said curtly, not offering help with her bag or even holding the door fully open. The interior was as cold as the air outside. Vaulted ceilings stretched like silent cathedrals above her, chandeliers twinkling like frozen tears. There was no music, no smell of food, no signs of life beyond the glimmer of wealth. Tayana's footsteps muffled into thick, imported rugs. She couldn't help but notice the walls lined with expensive art, faces and landscapes all pale, sterile, distant. It felt like stepping into a museum where feelings were not permitted. Damien led her to a room that could have been a library or interrogation room. Hard to tell. He dropped a crisp packet on the table. Schedule, feeding times, nap times, no junk food, no singing, no opinions. His words were clipped, his tone full of irritation, as if the very act of explaining his child's needs bored him. "And don't cook. My chef prepares everything. I don't need your hands on my son's plate." Tayana's heart clenched slightly, but she kept her voice even. "Yes, sir." She knew that tone. It wasn't new. She'd heard it at department stores, at banks, in elevators, anywhere power and race collided. But this time it hit deeper, because a child was involved. "You'll live in the East Wing," he added, already turning away. "There's a monitor. Don't leave your wing after 9 p.m. unless it's urgent." "Understood," she said softly, her suitcase still by her side. But then he turned. "One more thing," he said, his voice edged in frost. "He's delicate. I don't want him confused. Don't let him get too attached." Tayana blinked. "He's a baby." "Exactly," Damien snapped. "He doesn't know the difference yet, but he will." And with that, he walked away. Left standing in the middle of silence, Tayana exhaled slowly. Her fingers curled slightly at her side, not in anger, but restraint. She picked up her bag and began walking toward the east wing. Her new room was tidy, clinical, as if pre-designed to suppress emotion. But she unpacked methodically, her grandmother's Bible, a photo of her and her late mother in a silver frame, and a single lavender-scented candle she always kept by her bed. Rituals that reminded her of who she was. She changed into softer clothes and finally followed the schedule to meet the baby. Leo? The name was scribbled in a tight, masculine font on the schedule, but nothing about the child matched that rigid script. He was light, his skin soft like cream, eyes a pale blue-grey like mist over water. He blinked up at her as she leaned into the crib, and in that moment, something shifted. His tiny fingers curled in the air, reaching for nothing, until they found her. Her pinky disappeared in his grasp like he was claiming her. She smiled. Not a professional smile, not a practiced nanny smile. A real one. "Hey there, baby," she whispered. Her voice was velvet and sunlight. "I'm Tay. I'm here now." Leo gurgled, blinking lazily. There was no fear in him, only curiosity, only innocence. She picked him up gently, holding him close as he nuzzled into her sweater. He smelled like powder and possibility. The schedule said he needed a nap, but he seemed content just lying in her arms. She hummed, not loudly, but softly, just enough for the sound to wrap around them. Not a lullaby, per se, just a rhythm from her soul. Maybe an old melody her mother used to sing. She forgot herself in it, forgot the rules, forgot the mansion. She rocked gently in the nursery chair, unaware that a camera blinked red quietly in the corner of the room. Time slowed. Her heartbeat matched the baby's. Her walls lowered just enough to let something warm bloom in her chest. She had cared for children before, but this one felt different. Not because of who he was, but because of who she needed to be for him. Tayana didn't know yet what this house would take from her, or what it would force her to reclaim. But in that moment, her arms around Leo and the cold mansion outside her little cocoon, she whispered a silent promise. "You're not going to grow up cold." Tayana was still in the rocking chair, Leo's cheek nestled against her chest, when the nursery door swung open without a knock. The soft hum she'd been singing, barely above a whisper, froze on her lips. Damien Cross stood in the doorway, his silhouette tall and cold as ever, arms folded, jaw tight. His eyes didn't land on her first, but on Leo, then on the small blinking red dot in the corner of the room. The camera. Tayana instinctively pulled the blanket higher over Leo's back, shielding him, like some instinct told her he was no longer safe in the arms of wealth. "What did I say about singing?" Damien's voice cut through the air like a whip, low but seething. Tayana didn't flinch. She'd long ago taught herself how to sit still in the face of anger, but her stomach tightened as if it wanted to recoil. "It was just a hum," she said, gently. She stood, not in defiance, but so she wouldn't have to look up at him. "He likes it. He stopped crying." "It's not your place to comfort him," Damien snapped, stepping closer. His gaze burned, not from passion, but control. "You're here to keep him safe and clean, not to turn him into your little project. He has no idea who you are. You're just staff." Tayana swallowed back the lump that was rising in her throat, not because the words shocked her, but because they came from a man speaking about his own child, like a task, not a soul. She felt Leo stir, as if sensing the tension that choked the room. "He's not confused," she said softly, tucking Leo back into his crib. Babies know love. It's not color-coded. Damien's eyes narrowed, and for a second, just one, he looked at her like she'd said something dangerous. Then, dismissively, he stepped back. "Don't test me, Miss Brooks. I've replaced better people for less." With that, he turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him like a verdict. Tayana stood still for a long time. Her hands trembled only once she was alone. She looked down at Leo, now asleep, his fingers still curled as if they missed her touch. A deep ache settled in her chest. Not for herself, but for this boy born into a fortress colder than winter. She sat beside the crib for an hour, just watching him breathe, promising him with her silence that he would not be alone. That night at dinner, Tayana entered the staff kitchen, where warmth did exist, at least in laughter, and shared complaints. The cook, Marla, a short Puerto Rican woman with silver hair and a wicked tongue, handed Tayana a glass of sweet tea. "He got to you already?" Marla asked knowingly. Tayana smiled faintly. "He's not the friendly type." Marla rolled her eyes. "He's not the human type. Don't take it personal. You're not the first nanny he's made cry." Another maid chimed in from across the counter. "One girl quit after a week, said he watched her like she was stealing the baby's soul." They all laughed, but Tayana didn't. Not because it wasn't funny, but because it was too true. "I'm not here for him," she said quietly. "I'm here for the baby." The kitchen fell quiet for a second, and Marla looked at her. Really looked. "Just watch yourself, Tay. He don't like women who shine." Over the next week, the coldness calcified. Tayana followed every rule. She avoided eye contact. She spoke only when necessary. And still, she could feel his contempt curling in the air whenever she passed. She watched as he refused to hold Leo, delegating everything to others, barking orders like the child was a liability, not a miracle. Once, Leo cried for 30 minutes while Damien took a call in the same room, ignoring him, pacing back and forth like he didn't hear the baby's screams. Tayana stood by the door, aching to intervene, her hands clenched at her sides. When he left, she rushed in, picked up the trembling child, and cried with him. Quietly, into his tiny shoulder. That night, she cooked grits and eggs for herself in the back kitchen. Not out of rebellion, but hunger, and when Leo woke up early, she brought him a bottle she'd warmed herself. She didn't sing. She didn't smile wide, but she held him like she always would have. A few nights later, she passed Damien in the hallway. His voice stopped her cold. "You know he's going to look nothing like you, right?" The words hung in the air like smoke. "One day, he'll wonder why someone like you was ever in his life." Tayana didn't look at him. Her voice was calm, but her hands shook. "Maybe. But I hope he also remembers that someone like me loved him when no one else did." Damien didn't respond. He walked away. That night, Tayana cried into her pillow for the first time since she arrived. Not because of what he said, but because of the truth of it. Because she knew one day Leo would grow up and start asking questions about who held him, fed him, rocked him to sleep, and the world might try to erase her from his memory. But tonight, in this moment, she was here, real, present. And that had to be enough. As she stood up to check the monitor one last time, she whispered into the dark nursery, "I'm not your mother, baby, but I'll be your beginning." It was early one morning when the house was still wrapped in the stillness of pre-dawn hours. Tayana stood by the crib, gazing down at Leo. She hadn't meant to be standing there for so long, but somehow the quiet moments became the ones she cherished the most. She'd always been the kind of person who found peace in silence, a kind of silence that felt full, not empty. The first time she had held Leo, she'd promised herself she wouldn't let him feel the same emptiness this house seemed to echo in every corner. She had come to believe that sometimes silence spoke louder than words, and today it was speaking in a soft, innocent voice. As she watched him sleep, something fluttered in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name, but knew instinctively. This child was becoming a part of her life in ways she never imagined. Then it happened. Leo stirred in his sleep, his tiny lips parting, as if he were searching for something, someone. His eyes flickered open for a moment, and in the softest, most delicate whisper, the word escaped from his lips. Tay. The sound was so quiet, so pure, that for a second she thought it might have been her imagination. But it wasn't. It was real. Her name, spoken by a baby who barely knew language, came out like a promise, like a gift. Her heart lurched, and she bent closer, as if afraid to breathe too loudly and shatter the delicate moment. The joy that swelled inside her was short-lived, however. The unmistakable sound of Damien's footsteps echoed down the hallway. He had been away most of the night, working late again. But now he was back. The door to the nursery opened before Tayana could even fully react. She stood there, frozen, her hand hovering over Leo's tiny body, not daring to touch him as she looked up into Damien's face. His eyes immediately locked onto Leo, and then onto her, the way a hawk eyes its prey. "What did you do?" His voice was low, furious. Tayana's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know how to explain what had just happened, not without sounding foolish. I didn't do anything," she said, her voice calm but trembling beneath the surface. Damien stepped forward, looking down at his son, as if he were a rare and fragile artifact. "He shouldn't be saying your name. He's not your child." His words were like ice water splashing across her chest. "You're not here to form some bond with him. You're here to care for him. But I see it now. You've been trying to manipulate him." His accusation hit her like a slap, unprovoked and brutal. She opened her mouth to protest, to explain, but he cut her off. "I'll be watching you, Tayana. Don't think I won't fire you on the spot." His words felt like a chain tightening around her chest. The silent weight of his disdain was heavier than the walls of this house. He turned and left without another word, leaving Tayana standing there with nothing but the sound of her own heartbeat thudding in her ears. She felt the sting of his words, the sting of being seen as nothing more than a tool, an object. He couldn't see her. Not really. He couldn't see how much she loved this child. He didn't understand. He didn't care to. But Leo had spoken her name. He had called for her. It was enough. Later that night, Tayana sat in the empty nursery, rocking Leo gently in her arms. The weight of the day's events sat heavily on her shoulders, but she refused to let them touch her when it came to Leo. He was too innocent, too precious. As the baby drifted into a quiet sleep, she stepped out of the nursery and into the living room. There, in the shadows, she noticed the small baby monitor camera perched atop the bookshelf. Damien had always been meticulous about ensuring his son was watched over, perhaps too much so. Something pulled at her, something faintly unsettling, and she moved closer. The monitor wasn't just for security, it was also an audio and video recorder. She clicked it on, and the screen flickered to life. Tayana's breath caught in her throat when she saw the grainy footage. Leo, alone in his crib, whispering her name in his sleep. The camera had captured it all. The way he fidgeted and wriggled in his sleep. The way he softly called for her, as if he could sense her absence. Tay! Tay! She watched in stunned silence. He was calling for her. She wasn't imagining it. The video showed Leo reaching out toward the crib bars, murmuring for her, eyes closed, but desperately reaching for something only he knew. Tayana felt her heart twist in her chest. She wasn't just a figure in his life. She was a lifeline. But as she watched the video, something darker began to crawl into her mind. Damien had installed the camera, and while the footage confirmed her connection to Leo, it also proved just how closely he was watching, how far he would go to control every aspect of her involvement in his son's life. The words echoed again. "Don't think I won't fire you on the spot." She knew then that her place in this mansion wasn't just about keeping Leo safe. It was about surviving this house, surviving Damien, and surviving the distance he wanted to create between her and the child she had come to love so deeply. She couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not after everything. She sat down on the couch, the video still playing in front of her. She let the tears fall, this time, not out of despair, but from something much deeper. Love, she realized. She had fallen in love with this child, a love so pure and fierce that nothing, not even Damien's cold rejection, could take it away. Not now. Not ever. And with that, Tayana made a vow. She would protect Leo, not just from the dangers of the world, but from the walls being built between him and the only person who truly cared for him. She didn't know how yet, but she would find a way. The night had fallen heavy with silence, the kind of quiet that settled deep into the bones. Tayana sat by Leo's crib, his tiny body racked with fever, his small form burning hotter than the blankets wrapped around him. His breathing was shallow, uneven, and it broke her heart with each uneven rise and fall of his chest. She had seen children sick before, too many to count, but never one she loved so fiercely. Never one who depended on her like this. She pressed a cool cloth to his forehead, the water quickly soaking through as the fever raged on. It was the middle of the night, and Damien hadn't yet returned home. She was alone with Leo, and in that moment, she was all he had. Leo whimpered in his sleep, tossing and turning, too small to understand what was happening to his body. Tayana whispered to him, her voice soft and soothing as she held him close. "You're gonna be okay, baby," she murmured, brushing a strand of damp hair from his forehead. "Just stay with me a little longer, all right?" She wiped the sweat from his tiny face, but no matter how much she did, the fever wouldn't relent. Her hands trembled as she adjusted him in her arms, feeling the heat of his small body against her chest, and she quietly rocked him, hoping it would bring him some comfort. Hours passed, but the fever didn't break. Her mind wandered to the worst-case scenario, but she didn't dare let those thoughts consume her. She knew better than to let fear control her. She had survived enough storms in her life to know that strength came in the form of quiet persistence. Around dawn, Damien finally came home. He didn't say a word as he walked through the door, his face drawn and tired from the long hours of work. But as soon as he entered the nursery, his eyes landed on Tayana, and for a brief second, something flickered in his gaze. He saw her, really saw her, for the first time in a long while. She wasn't just the nanny. She wasn't the help. She was a woman holding his son, her arms wrapped around him with a tenderness that mirrored the love of a mother. Tayana was exhausted, her eyes swollen with lack of sleep. But her love for Leo was written across every part of her being. Her posture, the way she stroked his back, the rhythm of her breathing as she waited for his fever to break. Damien's heart stuttered for a moment, a rare softness breaking through the hardened walls he had carefully built around himself. He stood still for just a moment, watching Tayana with Leo, her face illuminated by the faint light of the morning. She was unshaken by the turmoil of the night, her resolve unbreakable, her hands gentle as she held the child in a way that no one else had ever held him. For the briefest second, Damien saw a vulnerability in her, a woman who had stepped into his world with nothing but love to offer his son. She wasn't like the others. She didn't ask for more than she was given. She wasn't after power or wealth. She was here out of sheer devotion. But then, the moment passed. The darkness of his thoughts, the judgment that he couldn't seem to escape, settled back into his chest like a weight. He remembered the color of her skin, and in an instant, that softness vanished. He didn't trust it. He couldn't. Her blackness, to him, was a boundary that could never be crossed, a line he couldn't allow himself to forgive. His entire life had been built on walls, walls that kept things safe, walls that defined his world in a way that kept him in control. And in that moment, as his gaze flickered back to Leo's flushed face, that control slipped for a second, but only a second. He couldn't let it linger. He turned away abruptly, his gaze narrowing, as he said in a low voice, "I'll take him from here." There was no softness in his words, only command. Tayana didn't argue. She understood the unspoken rule, the power he wielded over every inch of this house, every life that existed in it. Even Leo. She handed him the baby, and as he took Leo from her arms, her hands lingered for just a fraction of a second, as if to hold on to something she couldn't name. Damien barely glanced at her as he left the room, the child still hot with fever in his arms, the tiny form, once again, just an object in his world. Tayana stood there, her body drained of every ounce of energy, but her spirit unyielding. She had no choice but to stand by and watch Damien control what was already slipping from his grasp. She could see the doubt in his eyes when he saw her holding Leo, and it made her wonder. Would it always be like this? Would it always be a fight to protect this child, to give him what he needed, when the world tried to tell her she wasn't enough simply because of where she came from? The silence in the room felt deafening. She had no answers, but she knew one thing. She wasn't giving up on Leo. Not ever. The fever didn't break that day, nor the next. But Tayana stayed by Leo's side, nursing him with quiet devotion, her love for him the only constant in the chaos of the mansion. Each passing day was a reminder of how deep the divide ran between her and Damien, but it also revealed something even more powerful, her own unwavering resilience. She would not let him be just another man in her life who tried to erase her. She would fight for Leo, quietly, fiercely, until her last breath if she had to. And somewhere, in the back of her mind, a voice whispered that love, when given the chance, could be stronger than even the walls of this cold mansion. The days that followed felt heavier than the ones before. The fever had broken, but the weight in Tayana's chest hadn't. Leo slept more now, his little body regaining strength in the slow, steady way children do, like sunlight returning to a winter-struck garden. Tayana resumed her quiet care, staying invisible as much as possible, though her eyes never stopped watching, and her ears stayed open to the walls that spoke in whispers. The mansion, with its thick doors and long hallways, seemed designed to keep secrets. But that night, the house let one slip. Tayana had just left the nursery, the faint sound of Leo's soft breathing still in her memory, when she paused near the staircase, her feet halting on instinct. From the study below, Damien's voice rose, sharper than she'd ever heard it, layered in anger and something else she couldn't name. "I told you, that place doesn't exist to me anymore," he hissed. She froze, her breath caught in her throat as she stepped silently closer, her bare feet making no sound on the polished floor. There was a pause. A woman's voice replied, muffled, sharp, but full of pain. Tayana couldn't make out the words, but she felt the bitterness carry through the line. Damien's voice cut in again, louder now. "You don't get to call and bring up the past. Not after what you did. Not after you left me standing there like a damn fool." Another silence. Then a scoff from him, low and bitter. "The cabin in the hills was a mistake. We both know it." Tayana leaned closer, her hand brushing against the cold wall, heart thudding. He was pacing now. She could hear it, his footsteps quick, agitated. "No, you don't get to talk about Leo," Damien said suddenly, his voice breaking for just a moment. "He doesn't even know you exist, and that's how it's going to stay." Tayana's breath hitched. Leo? The conversation twisted in her mind like smoke, confusing, heartbreaking. Who was this woman? What did she mean to Damien? To Leo? Her instincts screamed at her. This wasn't just an ex-lover. This was someone tethered to Damien's past, to his rage, and maybe even to his child. She pressed herself into the corner of the wall, listening as the argument spiraled. "I told you never to come back. That chapter is closed," Damien snapped. "And if you come near this house, so help me." He didn't finish the sentence. The line must have gone dead. Silence returned like a slamming door. Tayana pulled back, her thoughts racing. She didn't want to know his business. But this was about Leo. It had to. But she walked back to her room that night, not with fear, but with a fire growing in her. She couldn't shake the sound of Damien's voice, so full of venom, but also haunted. The way he said, "the cabin in the hills," stuck with her. She'd never heard of it before. No one in the house ever mentioned anything outside of work. The staff barely spoke his name. But that cabin, it mattered. And whoever that woman was, she had history with Damien. Dark, unfinished history. Tayana lay awake, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, the memory of the phone call playing again and again. She made herself remember every word, every inflection, every pause. Something told her she would need those details soon. Not because she was nosy, but because she needed to understand who Damien really was, who Leo's father really was. Because deep down, something didn't sit right. That voice on the phone, there had been pain in it, regret. It wasn't just a fling. And it wasn't over. Tayana could feel it. And if there was even the smallest chance that Leo was caught in the middle of something bigger, something hidden, she had to be ready. For him. She turned onto her side and looked out the window at the vast, empty sky beyond the mansion walls. Somewhere out there, a story was still unfolding, and Tayana Brooks, nanny, caretaker, invisible woman, was the only one paying attention. The storm came in without warning, sudden and violent, rattling the mansion like a beast clawing at its walls. Thunder rolled over the estate like war drums, and lightning fractured the sky, casting strange, strobing shadows through Tayana's bedroom window. She hadn't slept at all. Her thoughts were still wrapped around the phone call she'd overheard, and the haunting way Damien had spoken about the woman and the mysterious cabin. But everything stilled when she heard it. No cry, no coo, no rustle from Leo's room across the hall. It was too quiet, unnaturally quiet. Her heart seized. She got out of bed without thinking, bare feet hitting the cold floor as she rushed into the hallway. The nursery door was ajar, swinging slightly from the gusts of wind sneaking in through an open window. That alone made her blood run cold. She had closed it earlier. She always closed it. "Leo," she whispered, stepping in. The crib was empty. The blankets were still warm, but he was gone. Her breath vanished. Her body froze. For a moment, she thought she might be dreaming. A trick of the mind, a cruel, exhausted illusion. But then she saw the scattered stuffed animals on the floor, the rocking chair tipped slightly forward as if someone had leaned on it too hard, and a faint, muddy footprint near the edge of the white rug. Her knees buckled. She screamed his name, once, then again, panic rising from the pit of her stomach like a wildfire. The house erupted with chaos. Within minutes, the staff were awake, the lights flaring on, one by one. Alarms didn't blare, because they had been disabled. Disabled. That one word snapped in her brain like a trap. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Damien burst into the hallway, shirt half-buttoned, eyes wild, hair damp with rain. "Where is he?" he roared. "Where the hell is my son?" Tayana tried to speak, but the words wouldn't form. She was shaking, her hands clutching the edge of the crib, as if she could will Leo back into it. I don't know. He was here," she gasped. "I heard nothing. I swear to God, Damien. I just came in, and he was gone." But he didn't hear her. Or maybe he refused to. His voice boomed again, this time sharper. "You were the last one with him. This is your fault. What did you do?" His accusations tore through her like knives. The other staff backed away as Damien's fury zeroed in on her. She was acting strange, always too close, obsessed with him. He barked at the housekeeper, at the chef, at the gardener, who had just wandered in from the back door. "She's the only one who's ever in his room," police were called. Blue and red lights painted the marble floors like bruises. Officers swarmed the property, demanding statements, ordering everyone to sit tight. They questioned Tayana first. They pulled her aside, their voices sterile, cold, clinical. "You were on duty," one of them said. "Why didn't you hear anything? No broken windows, no forced entry. But the alarm system was off. That takes a code. You know the code, don't you?" She blinked through tears. "No, yes. I know it, but I would never—" Her voice cracked. "I would never hurt Leo. I love that baby." They didn't look moved. One officer stared at her like she was a puzzle piece that didn't belong. "We're gonna need to check your room," he said. Another added, "You understand this looks bad for you, right?" Damien watched from across the room, arms crossed, expression dark. He didn't say a word in her defense. Not even when they opened her drawers, checked her phone, treated her like a suspect instead of the woman who had rocked his son through illness, nightmares, and long nights of silence. "Tell me the truth, Tayana," Damien said at last, his voice like acid. "Did you take him? Are you trying to punish me?" That broke her. "Punish you?" she repeated, stunned. "You think I'd punish you by hurting him? That child is the only light in this God-forsaken place." Her voice cracked open, raw and filled with rage. "You hate me because of the color of my skin, because I'm not someone you'd ever trust. But your son trusts me, and I would die before letting harm come to him." For the first time, the room fell quiet. One of the officers glanced at Damien. "Sir," he said carefully, "she's been cooperative. We're going to need to widen the search. If the system was disabled, it was done by someone who knew what they were doing." Outside, the rain pounded harder. Flashlights scanned the grounds. Drones were sent up. The air was thick with dread. Tayana stood on the front steps, soaked to the skin, her hands trembling as she stared into the darkness. Somewhere out there, Leo was alone, frightened, maybe crying for her, and she had no idea where to begin. But she vowed, right then and there, through gritted teeth and a breaking heart, "I will find you, baby, no matter what it costs me, even if the man who should be helping me is trying to destroy me. I will not stop until you're safe." And far beyond the property, in the hills that Damien swore never to speak of, a small light flickered through the fog. The rain had quieted by morning, but the house remained choked in darkness, as if the storm had seeped into its bones. The search had yielded nothing overnight. No tracks, no signs, no ransom note, no sounds from the woods that wrapped around the mansion like arms hiding a secret. Tayana sat curled on the nursery floor, clutching one of Leo's tiny shirts to her chest, her eyes hollow, swollen from tears that had run out hours ago. The room had been turned upside down, fingerprint dusting, drawers emptied, closets checked. The officers had left a mess, but no answers. Damien hadn't spoken to her since she'd shouted at him in front of everyone, and still, she didn't care. Let him rage. Let him stew in his bitter silence. All that mattered was Leo, his laughter, his sleepy sighs, the way his small fingers always reached for her braids when he was dozing off. Then it hit her. Something wasn't sitting right. A detail fluttered in the back of her mind, like a moth trying to escape. She rose slowly, her limbs aching, and began pacing, retracing her steps from days earlier. What was it? What had she missed? She looked at the corner table, where Leo used to scribble with crayons and napkins when she brought him snacks. Most of the papers had been cleared by the police, but one napkin had fallen behind the chair, a wrinkled, forgotten thing marked in a child's crude scrawl. Tayana reached for it, her heart starting to race. The drawing was simple. A triangle house, a swirl of trees, a round yellow sun with lines beaming from it, and a heart. Above the roof, scribbled letters spelled something wobbly but unmistakable. CABIN. Her breath caught. The memory collided with her all at once. The late-night phone call, Damien's voice saying, the cabin in the hills was a mistake. She hadn't just imagined it. Leo knew about it. Somehow, some way, the image had stayed with him, enough for him to draw it. Why would a toddler draw a cabin unless it meant something to him? And why had he drawn it just 2 days before vanishing? She sat down hard on the nursery rug, napkin clutched in her shaking hands. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Her mind rewound, fast and sharp. Damien's voice again. You don't get to talk about Leo. He doesn't even know you exist. But what if he did? What if someone had been whispering stories to Leo? A woman? A memory? A presence Damien tried to bury? Tayana stood. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes burned with certainty. She couldn't explain how she knew, but she did. Every instinct screamed it. Leo was at that cabin, or someone had taken him there. The napkin drawing was no accident. It was a breadcrumb. She turned and scanned the room for her phone, but remembered the police had confiscated it. Of course, she was still being watched, suspected. If she told them now, they'd dismiss her. Damien would laugh it off or accuse her of making up stories to deflect suspicion. No one believed her. No one ever had. But that had never stopped her before. She grabbed her coat from the hallway hook, threw on her boots, and tucked the napkin into her pocket, like it was a map. She walked past the kitchen where the staff whispered and fell silent when she entered. She didn't meet their eyes. Let them talk. Let them think what they wanted. She had no time for doubt, not when a child's life was at stake. Her love for Leo was louder than their prejudice, thicker than their silence, stronger than the lies that had soaked into this house for years. She slipped out through the back entrance as the clouds parted, the sky still grey, but no longer weeping. The world felt raw and alive, as if it too were holding its breath. She didn't know exactly where the cabin was, but she remembered Damien's words clearly. The hills. There was only one stretch of hills beyond the estate's northern edge, a place the staff always said was private land, off-limits, haunted by family drama no one dared ask about. That was where she would start. Her car was old, but it started with a loyal groan. As she pulled out of the winding drive, she didn't look back. Not at the mansion, not at the man who had accused her, not at the police tape still fluttering from the gate. This journey was hers now, hers and Leo's. And as the mansion disappeared in the rearview mirror, Tayana pressed one hand to her heart, the other on the wheel, whispering to the wind, "Hold on, baby. I'm coming." Because she was the only one who remembered, the only one who listened, the only one who truly saw Leo, not as a symbol, not as a possession, but as a child who needed her. And nothing, not the storm, not the suspicion, not Damien Cross himself, was going to stop her now. The hills loomed like sleeping giants beneath the mist, cloaked in a dense fog that swallowed the road as Tayana drove deeper into the wild. Damien's black SUV gripped the wet gravel with force, the headlights slicing through the greyness like desperate hands reaching for the truth. The napkin with Leo's drawing lay open on the passenger seat beside her, its crayon marks blurring slightly from her damp fingers. Her knuckles whitened on the wheel. Her heart thundered louder than the engine, louder than the wind scraping against the windows. She didn't know how far she would have to go, only that she had to keep going. The map in her mind was carved not from directions, but from feeling, memory, the kind of knowing that blooms from love and fear at once. Behind her, another engine roared, closer now. Damien. He must have seen the SUV was missing. He must think she was running. Of course he does. A man like him would never imagine a woman like her would be running toward something. Someone. She pressed the gas harder, flinching as the wheels bounced over a broken patch of earth. The forest closed in tighter on either side. No phone signal, no markers, just wild trees and muddy trails. Tayana's eyes darted between the road and the shadows ahead. Every turn felt like a question. Every gust of wind whispered a warning. Her breath fogged the windshield. Her arms trembled. But something inside her was burning steady and strong. The image of Leo's tiny face, the way he laughed, the way he held on to her shirt when he was sleepy, was her compass. Not one adult in that house believed her, not even the man who should have known his child better than anyone. But Leo had trusted her, and she was going to honor that trust, even if it broke her. The headlights behind her surged, growing larger. Tayana glanced in the mirror and saw Damien's silver car tearing through the mud, reckless, gaining fast. Her body tensed. He didn't know. He didn't understand. He thought she was stealing something from him, when in truth, she was trying to bring back everything he was too blind to hold on to. She swerved sharply to avoid a fallen branch, the SUV skidding, then righting itself just as the road narrowed into a worn, tree-covered path. The underbrush slapped the sides of the car like it wanted her to turn back, but she didn't. Her eyes flicked to the left, a mailbox, barely visible, bent and rusted. Her foot slammed the brakes. She recognized it. Something about the name faded across its surface. It matched what she'd heard Damien say. This was it. The cabin. She veered off the road, the SUV lurching onto a gravel path, half consumed by weeds. Behind her, Damien's car slowed, then followed, barreling over the same trail like a storm chasing lightning. Her tires squealed as she curved up a hill, the trees parting just enough to reveal a weathered old cabin ahead, wood dark with age, porch slumped like tired shoulders. A single light flickered in the window. Tayana's heart leapt. She didn't wait. The SUV was still rolling when she threw it into park and jumped out, feet sinking into wet leaves. She ran, calling softly, "Leo!" Her voice cracking from the cold and the weight of hope. Her fists banged the cabin door. "Please, Leo!" The knob turned from inside. The door creaked open slowly. And just as the silhouette appeared, small, shivering, unmistakably him, Damien's voice exploded from behind her like a gunshot. "Step away from my son." Tayana turned, tears already spilling down her cheeks. Leo stood in the doorway, sleepy and confused, his eyes lighting up at the sight of her. "Tay!" he cried, arms outstretched. Tayana dropped to her knees, but before she could gather him in her arms, Damien reached them, his face a storm of fury and disbelief. He looked past her, at the child who had just said her name, like it was a prayer. For a moment, no one spoke, just the sound of wind and breath, and something else cracking between them that had been held back too long. She didn't touch Leo. She didn't move. She just whispered, "I didn't take him. I found him." And for the first time, Damien Cross couldn't find a single word to argue with that truth. Tayana didn't flinch when Damien froze behind her, eyes locked on Leo, the boy standing barefoot in the doorway of the dark cabin, his face pale and tear-streaked, his arms trembling from cold and confusion. She stayed kneeling on the wet ground, breathing heavy, hands at her sides. She wasn't there to prove herself. She was there to save him. But Damien wasn't listening. Rage still clouded his judgment. He shoved past her, only to be stopped by a sudden, sharp sound. A growl, low and vicious, cutting through the tension like a blade. From around the side of the cabin, a large black dog stalked forward, its eyes glowing with animal suspicion. Tayana stiffened. The animal's ears pinned back, tail stiff. This wasn't a pit. It was trained. Leo whimpered, retreating into the cabin. "Tay!" he cried again, voice cracking as the dog advanced. Tayana rose slowly between the child and the threat, her arms instinctively spread. Damien was shouting something behind her, maybe at the dog, maybe at her, but it didn't matter. The dog lunged. Everything happened in seconds. Tayana didn't scream. She moved. She threw herself sideways to shield Leo, pushing him gently back with one hand as the other grabbed the rusted broom leaning beside the cabin door. The dog's jaws caught her arm mid-swing, teeth sinking deep. She didn't fall. Her legs shook, but held, heart pounding, as she forced the broom's broken bristles between the dog's neck and collar, twisting, driving it back. It yelped, released her, and staggered. She slammed the cabin door behind Leo, locking it, her blood dripping onto the doormat, the pain hot and spreading. Still, she faced the dog. The thing growled again, but this time, it didn't charge. It sensed the shift, her defiance, her fire. Then a gun cocked. Damien. He had drawn a weapon from his glove compartment. He stepped forward, aiming at the animal. "Get back!" he shouted. But Tayana raised her injured arm and cried, "No!" Her voice stopped him cold. She wasn't saving Leo just to have more blood spilled. The dog, panting, backed into the shadows and vanished around the side of the cabin. Breathless, she turned, her knees buckling. Damien rushed forward, but not to help her. His eyes searched for Leo. "Where is she?" he demanded. "The woman. Was she here?" Tayana clutched her wounded arm. "Gone," she whispered. "She ran before we got here. She left Leo alone, probably scared of the police, the news, everything closing in. She thought the dog would keep people out." Inside the cabin, Leo's sobs echoed. Tayana opened the door slowly. He launched into her arms without hesitation, burying his face in her neck, sobbing her name over and over again. The pain in her arm dissolved into the background. She wrapped her good arm around him tightly, breathing in the scent of his hair, whispering into his ear, "You're safe, baby. I got you. I got you." Damien stood in the doorway, watching the boy, his boy, cling to the woman he had distrusted, dismissed, disrespected. The woman who now stood bleeding, shaking, and still standing strong. He looked at Leo, then at Tayana, and for once his mouth did not move. No questions, no accusations, just stunned, aching silence. And then Leo did something that shattered the last walls. He reached one small hand toward Damien. Not to pull him close, but to pull him into Tayana's arms. A bridge, a choice, an invitation. And Damien didn't move, not at first. He stood there like a man realizing he'd misjudged the world. Finally, quietly, he stepped forward. He helped Tayana up. His hand touched her arm gently, where the bite had torn the skin. And for once, it wasn't out of control. It was something closer to gratitude, clumsy, unspoken, but real. Tears slipped from Tayana's eyes, but not because of the pain, because Leo was safe, because despite everything, she had found him, and because for the first time since she'd entered that cold mansion, someone saw her, not just as the help, not just as the black nanny, but as the woman who had walked through fire to save a child that wasn't hers, but somehow always had been. The cold air bit at Tayana's skin, and the weight of everything, Leo's safety, her injuries, the fear and the fight, pressed down on her chest. She cradled the boy close, feeling his sobs against her neck. He had stopped crying, but his tiny body trembled with the fear of what he'd just endured. It wasn't the same sobbing child she had soothed before, and she held him tighter, as if she could somehow erase the pain he had felt. He was safe now. She would make sure of it. She would never let anything hurt him again. Tayana's hand shook where it rested against Leo's back, and her other arm still throbbed from the dog's attack. The blood had begun to dry, but the pain was relentless, a reminder of how much she had sacrificed to get to this point. She wasn't sure how long she sat there, holding Leo, fighting off the darkness creeping at the edges of her vision from exhaustion. But the silence was broken by a familiar sound. The roar of Damien's SUV. Her heart lurched in her chest. He had arrived. The man who had dismissed her, ignored her, and who had never truly seen her until now. She didn't know if he was coming to yell at her, to blame her for everything, or if he had come to take Leo back from her arms, as if she had done something wrong. She braced herself for the storm that was about to break. Damien's footsteps were heavy as he approached. He said nothing at first, just looked at her, his face a mix of confusion and horror as his eyes flicked from Tayana to Leo. The sight of her, bleeding, exhausted, holding his son as if her life depended on it, broke something in him. Something deep. He had been so sure of himself before, so convinced of his control, but in that moment he saw her differently. "Tayana," his voice cracked. It was barely above a whisper. His eyes filled with disbelief as he took in the scene. The blood on her clothes, the way she was trembling, the way Leo clung to her, as though his very life depended on it. She could see the walls coming down. Damien stood there, stunned, fighting to comprehend the weight of the situation. He looked at his son, at her, and then back to Leo, his voice trembling with something softer than anger. You saved him," he said, his words thick with a realization that struck him like a punch to the gut. Tayana didn't respond at first. She couldn't. The exhaustion was suffocating her, draining her will to even speak. Her eyes locked with Damien's for a moment, but it was as if the world had stopped spinning. She wasn't sure if she could stand anymore. Her body felt like it had been shattered and pieced back together just to keep going. Leo, sensing the shift, finally lifted his head from Tayana's chest. His little face was streaked with tears, and he stretched his small arms toward his father, wanting to bridge the gap that had separated them for so long. "Daddy." His voice was small, almost broken. It was a whisper, a plea for comfort, for something that had been missing in his young life. Damien flinched as Leo reached out, but instead of retreating, he stepped forward, slowly, cautiously. There were no harsh words, no demands, just the rawness of a man facing the consequences of his own ignorance. His hand shook as he touched his son's face, brushing away a tear that had fallen in the wake of everything that had happened. The anger, the pride, the arrogance, all of it melted away as he gazed into his son's eyes. And in that moment, Damien Cross understood the depth of his mistakes. He saw the woman who had fought for his child, fought for his son, in ways he never had. He saw how much Tayana had risked, how much she had given, just to keep Leo safe. His knees buckled. He collapsed onto the cold earth beside her, his hand falling on her knee, his fingers trembling as he reached out, a silent apology, a question without words. Tayana looked down at him, surprised, but the weight of it all was too much. The tears that had been trapped deep inside her began to spill over, and for the first time in a long while, she let them fall. She was too tired to hold them back, too tired to fight anymore. Damien looked up at her, his voice broken. I was wrong," he said, and his eyes were wet with his own realization. "I thought you were just the nanny. I thought you were nothing but nothing. But you were everything." He swallowed, his words heavy with shame. "You were everything to Leo. And I didn't see it. I didn't see you. I thought I knew what was best for him. But it was you, Tayana. It's always been you." Tayana shook her head, a mix of relief and pain flooding her heart. She had no words to give him, no answers. She wasn't sure what they could be now, but there was one truth that had always been there. "I never wanted anything from you. Just him," she whispered, her voice strained from the weight of everything. "Just him, Damien. Just to protect him." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the understanding they both had been avoiding. Damien nodded slowly. Then, gently, he reached for Leo, his son, his only son. He pulled him close, holding him with a tenderness Tayana had never seen from him. The two of them sat there, the wind howling around them. But in that moment, nothing else mattered. They were together. They were a family. And in the silence that followed, Tayana allowed herself to rest her eyes, knowing Leo was safe in both their arms. Finally. She had given everything she had, and in return, for the first time, Damien Cross was seeing her for who she truly was, and it was more than enough. The sterile smell of the hospital was heavy in the air, and the dim fluorescent lights cast a cold, almost impersonal glow on everything around her. Tayana lay in the bed, her body still aching from the ordeal, but her mind was calmer now. The overwhelming rush of adrenaline that had carried her through the worst of it slowly ebbing away. She was exhausted, but for the first time in a long time, there was a sense of peace lingering in her chest. She was just about to close her eyes when the door creaked open. Tayana's breath caught for a moment. She wasn't sure what she expected, perhaps a nurse checking in, or even just the sound of someone moving through the hall. But when she saw him standing there, Damien Cross, his dark eyes bloodshot, his jaw tight, and his posture hunched, as if the weight of his own guilt had crushed him into that very spot. She felt a mix of emotions surge through her. He stepped forward slowly, almost tentatively, and for a moment neither of them said a word. The sound of the beeping machines and the quiet shuffle of the nurse outside the door seemed to fill the space between them. Damien lingered at the foot of the bed, unsure of how to start. What words could possibly make sense of everything that had happened? Tayana's gaze stayed on him, but she didn't say anything either. Her throat was dry, her emotions tangled. She'd never expected an apology, never expected him to look at her with anything other than disdain. But here he was, standing before her, not as the man who had once treated her as invisible, but as someone who had realized the depth of his mistakes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Damien spoke, his voice rough and uncertain. "Tayana." He swallowed, his eyes dropping to the floor, before lifting back up to meet hers. I don't know how to say this, but I need you to know how sorry I am." He paused, his hands clenching by his sides, as if trying to control the storm inside him. "I was a fool. I treated you like you didn't matter, like you were nothing more than someone who existed just to take care of Leo. But you're so much more than that." Tayana stayed silent, but her heart thudded in her chest. She could hear the weight of his words, but she didn't know how to process them. The man who had shouted at her, belittled her, never once seeing her worth, was now standing here, apologizing, not just for what he had done, but for not understanding the very person she was, the person who had given everything to protect his son. Damien took a shaky breath, moving closer to the bedside. His voice faltered, but grew stronger with each word. You saved him. You saved my son, and you loved him when I couldn't even love myself enough to see what was right in front of me. I'm grateful. More than I can ever express." His hand reached out, almost hesitantly, before it settled on the edge of her bed, not quite touching her, but close enough for her to feel the sincerity of his regret. Tayana looked at him, her lips trembling as she gathered the strength to speak. "Damien," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "you didn't just make mistakes with me. You've been so blind to Leo, to yourself, to the love that was always right in front of you. But you're here now, and you're trying. That's all that matters." She paused, her hand reaching for his. Just a simple gesture, but one that carried so much weight. "You don't have to apologize anymore. You've already done the most important thing. By seeing me. By seeing him." Damien closed his eyes at the gentleness in her voice, the forgiveness that flowed from her as if it had always been there. He let out a slow exhale and nodded, almost as if to say, "I will never take you for granted again." He leaned in slightly, his next words coming out in a soft whisper. "I don't want you to leave, Tayana. Not as a nanny. Not like that." He looked up at her, his gaze intense. "I want you to stay. I want you to be a part of Leo's life. A part of our lives. I don't know what the future holds, but I can't imagine it without you in it. Without you, the woman who has been so much more than I ever gave you credit for." The words hung in the air, fragile, yet hopeful. Damien didn't know if he was ready to promise forever, but he knew one thing for sure. Tayana was the woman who had taught him what love truly meant. He couldn't take that for granted. Not anymore. Tayana blinked back tears, but her heart swelled. She didn't know if she could completely forgive him just yet. Not everything, but the invitation was all she needed to hear. It was more than just words. It was an offer to build something new. A family. Her hand reached up, brushing the stray strands of hair from her face as she gave a small, tired smile. "I'll stay," she whispered, her voice steady now. "For Leo? For you. But only if you mean it. You can't just say the words, Damien. You have to show me. You have to show him." Damien nodded, his eyes filling with unshed tears, as if the weight of her words settled deep into his soul. "I will. I promise." And with that promise, something inside both of them began to heal. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be perfect. But it was real. Tayana's heart felt lighter, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future. One where love, not just duty, would guide them forward. As she closed her eyes, she felt a soft weight on the bed, Leo's tiny hand holding hers, as if he too understood that their lives had just shifted. Their broken pieces had found each other, and in that moment, as Damien sat by her side, Tayana knew they were beginning to rebuild. Together. As the days blurred into weeks, the mansion that once felt like a cold, lifeless structure began to change. Tayana's presence infused warmth into the corners of the house. Her laughter, her gentle voice calling to Leo, her kindness, and her unspoken strength. Everything about her made the house feel alive, like it had a heart again. Damien stood at the window, watching as Tayana played with Leo in the garden, the golden sunlight casting long shadows across the lush lawn. There was a softness in his gaze, a quiet understanding of how much he had taken for granted, how much he had misunderstood. The once ruthless millionaire who had cared for nothing but success now found himself grounded in something entirely new. Love. It wasn't just for Leo, but for Tayana, too. She had shown him what it meant to truly care, to give without expecting, to love without condition. And with every passing day, the bond between them, between the three of them, grew stronger. Damien took a deep breath, his chest tightening with emotion. The road to redemption had been long and painful, and it hadn't been easy for Tayana to forgive him. He knew that. But here she was, in his life, in Leo's life, making a difference every day. Her love for his son had never been something he had questioned, but seeing the way she loved him now, no longer a distant, obedient nanny, but a woman who had earned her place in their lives, he knew the truth. Tayana was not just the hero he needed. She was the heart they had both been missing. Leo ran toward him, his small legs carrying him faster with each day. Damien bent down, catching him in his arms as the boy giggled, wrapping his tiny arms around his father's neck. "Daddy, look! Mommy's teaching me to run fast." Leo's voice, innocent and full of joy, filled the air, and Damien felt his heart swell. Tayana's soft chuckle reached his ears, and Damien turned to see her walking toward them, a radiant smile on her face. She had begun calling herself Mommy in private, a title that once felt so foreign between them. But now it was real, more real than Damien had ever dared hope. "I'm sure you'll be faster than me soon enough," Tayana said as she approached, her eyes soft with affection as she looked at Leo. "But let's make sure you're not running too fast. We don't want any more scraped knees." Leo squealed with delight. "I want to race you, Mummy," he exclaimed, bouncing on his heels, his excitement infectious. Tayana smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and lit up the space around her. "Well, if you're going to race me, you'd better start practicing." Damien watched them, his heart full. He had never imagined he would be here, in this place, surrounded by love, with a family that felt real, not just an obligation or a contract. The memory of the way he had treated Tayana, the words he had used, the assumptions he had made about her and about life, it all felt like a distant shadow now. His world had expanded in ways he couldn't have anticipated, and it had all started with her. Tayana's voice brought him back to the present, soft but filled with meaning. "You know, Damien," she said, her tone light but carrying the weight of the truth. "It's not just about what we've been through. It's about what we choose to build from here. There's still a lot of work to do, but I'm willing to do it. Together." Damien nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'll do whatever it takes, Tayana. For you, for Leo. I'm here, and I know it's not perfect, but we'll make it perfect, day by day." She smiled, walking toward him with a quiet grace, reaching for his hand. The feel of her hand in his, steady and warm, was all the confirmation he needed. They had come through the storm. Now it was time to rebuild their lives, not on past mistakes or regrets, but on the love and trust they were learning to cultivate. "Together," she whispered again, her voice low, but full of certainty. Leo tugged at both their hands, breaking the moment of reflection with his innocent joy. "Race! Race!" he shouted, pulling them both toward the garden. Tayana laughed softly, and Damien's heart lightened with the sound of it. This was what life was about. These small moments. This was their family. As the three of them walked towards the garden, the weight of the past seemed to lift with each step. The mansion, once a place of cold and rigid walls, now felt like home, A place filled with laughter, with love, with forgiveness. A place where mistakes were learned from, where redemption was possible, and where a family had been rebuilt from the ground up. Tayana glanced at Damien, their eyes meeting for a fleeting moment. The unspoken understanding between them lingered in the air. They weren't perfect. They never would be. But they were together. And that was enough. For Leo. For each other. And for the first time, Damien understood the meaning of real wealth, not in money or power, but in love, in the chance to redeem himself, and in the family he had almost lost. Together, they walked into the future, into their future, with hearts full of hope and the promise of new beginnings.